Happy Tuesday. I'm Charlotte, and it is time for quarantine story time with War and Peace. Back at it again. Today, we are going to pick up in Volume 2, Part 3, Section 11. And we'll read through 15 today. As we recall, the end of yesterday was reading some of the diary of Pierre as he is discussing his relationship with the Masons and his desire to, what do I want to say? He wants to, bring more spirituality and better living into his life. Also, we picked up a little bit of Prince Andrei's new relationship with Speransky, who is the man who seems to be in charge of all things happening in Russia right now. He's he's the son of a priest or not a priest, but like a religious person, and he is progressive in wanting to overhaul Russia's government. And he seems very logical, and he definitely seems very astounding and logical to Prince Andrei, though there is touches of some doubt in there about exactly how logical and selfless his character really is in all of this. So there's that. And where we left was with Pierre, and I think we're going to start off with the Rostovs in section 11. I have the live chat up, so please say hi. If this is your first time here, of course, check out my channel for the War and Peace playlist, which has all the readings up until now. Welcome back to those who are here. Glad to see you guys are online. What else? I hope you've been checking out some of the links I put in the descriptions after the video. After the video goes up, there's some different descriptions. I'm going to have another petition we can sign for justice for a black young man who was killed, shot in the back 6 times while cosplaying as an anime character. This happened a couple of years ago, and there still hasn't been any justice or resolution. The city where he lives, I believe in California, tried to offer his mother a financial settlement with a gag order attached to it, and she said no. And so you can check out the link for more information. I'm not doing justice to the tragedy of this young man's story, but check out the link. Take a minute. Doesn't take much time to sign a petition. Yeah, and also a couple things. Thursday, there'll be a time change for Thursday's reading. It won't be at 3. It will be at noon. That's 1 and 12. So just change your quarantine clocks on Thursday to 12 o'clock, or check me out the video afterwards when it's just posted, no longer live. And then also Friday is Juneteenth. It's a major holiday for the Black community in America, because it is the celebration it's a celebration basically of emancipation of the slaves. It was the date that Union soldiers got all the way to Texas to let slaves know that, hey, by the way, you're freed. So it's a big holiday. I know there's going to be some protest march and solidarity marches. I'm going to be participating in that with a friend. If you have that opportunity, think about celebrating. Get on out there. Don't even think about it. Just get on out there. Be safe while you're doing it. Make sure you're wearing a mask. Try to be as socially distant as possible. But get out there and support your community and persons of color who are unfairly marginalized in our society. But it's a great day to celebrate with them. on Friday. So keep that in mind. Hey, like I said, I have the live chat up, so I drop a line and say hey. And without much further ado, let's jump back in with some War and Peace. And all right, so volume 2, part 3, section 11. The financial affairs of the Rostovs did not improve during the 2 years they spent in the country. Though Nikolai Rostov, keeping firmly to his intention, went on serving in an obscure regiment, spending comparatively little money, the way of life at the Otradno was such, and Mitenka in particular so conducted business, that the debts mounted irresistibly every year. The only help the old count could evidently envisage was government service, and he went to Petersburg to seek a post. And at the same time, as he said, to amuse the girls for the last time. Soon after the Rostovs came to Petersburg, Berg proposed to Vera, and his proposal was accepted. Despite the fact that in Moscow the Rostovs belonged to high society, without knowing or thinking what society they belonged to, in Petersburg, their society was mixed and indefinite. In Petersburg, they were provincials to whom the very people that the Rostovs fed in Moscow without asking what society they belonged to would not lower themselves. In Petersburg, the Rostovs lived as hospitably as in Moscow, and the most diverse people came together at their suppers. Their neighbor in Otradno, a poor elderly landowner with daughters, and the maid of honor, Peronsky, Pierre Bezukov, and the son of a provincial postmaster who served in Petersburg. Among the men who very soon became familiars of the Rostovs' house in Petersburg were Boris, Pierre, whom the old count met in the street and dragged home, and Berg, who spent the whole days at the Rostovs and showed the eldest daughter, Countess Vera, such attention as can only be shown by a young man who intends to propose. Not in vain had Berg displayed to everyone his right arm wounded at Austerlitz and held his utterly useless sword in his left hand. He recounted the incident to everyone so persistently and with such importance that they all believed in the expediency and merit of this action, and Berg received 2 decorations for Austerlitz. He had also managed to distinguish himself in the Finnish War. He had picked up a shell splinter that had killed an adjutant standing next to the commander-in-chief and offered this splinter to his superior. Just as after Austerlitz, he recounted this incident to everyone at such length and with such persistence that they all also believed in it had to have been done. And Berg received 2 decorations for the Finnish War. In 1809, he was a beribboned captain of the guards and occupied some sort of especially profitable posts in Petersburg. Though some freethinkers smiled when told of Berg's virtues, it was impossible not to admit that Berg was a good, brave officer, highly regarded by his superiors, and a modest, moral young man with a brilliant career ahead of him, and even a solid position in society. 4 years earlier, having met a German friend in the stalls of a Moscow theater, Berg had pointed Vera Rostov out to him and said in German, "Das soll mein Weib werden." She will be my wife. And from that moment on had determined to marry her. Now in Petersburg, having figured out the Rostov situation, he decided that the time had come and proposed. Berg's proposal was received first with a perplexity unflattering to him. At first, it seemed strange that the son of an obscure Livonian nobleman should propose to Countess Rostov. But Berg's chief quality was such naive and good-natured egoism that the Rostovs involuntarily thought it would be a good thing, since he himself was so firmly convinced that it would be good and even very good. What was more, the Rostovs' affairs were in great disorder, which the suitor could not help knowing, and above all, Vera was 24. She had come out everywhere, and despite her being unquestionably beautiful and sensible, up to then no one had ever proposed to her. The proposal was accepted. "So you see," Berg said to his comrade, whom he called his friend only because he knew that all people had friends, "you see, I figured it all out, and I wouldn't be getting married if I hadn't thought it all over, and if it were awkward for some reason. But now, on the contrary, my papa and mama are provided for. I've arranged that lease for them in the Ostsee region, and I can live with my wife in Petersburg on my salary, her fortune, and my carefulness. We can get along quite well. I'm not marrying for money. I consider that ignoble. But a wife ought to bring in hers and a husband his. I have my service, and she has her connections and some small means. In our time, that means something, doesn't it? And above all, she's an excellent, respectable girl, and she loves me. Berg blushed and smiled. And I love her because she has a sensible character, a very good one. Take the other sister, same family, but something quite different, an unpleasant character, and none of that intelligence and all that, you know. It's unpleasant, but my fiancé, you must come too, Berg went on. He was about to say to dinner, but changed his mind and said, to tea, and with a quick movement of his tongue let out a small, round smoke ring that fully embodied his dreams of happiness. After the first feeling of perplexity that Berg's proposal aroused in the parents, the festivity and joy as usual on such occasions installed themselves in the family, yet the joy was not sincere but external. In the feelings of the family regarding this marriage, confusion and abashedness could be noticed. It was as if they were ashamed that they loved Vera so little and were now so eager to get her off their hands. The Count was the most embarrassed of all. He probably would have been unable to give a name to the cause of his embarrassment, but that cause was his financial affairs. He decidedly did not know what he had, how far in debt he was, and what he would be able to give Vera as a dowry. When the daughters were born, each was assigned 300 souls as a dowry. But one of the estates had already been sold, another had been mortgaged and was so long overdue that it had to be sold. Therefore, it was impossible to give her an estate. There was no money either. Berg had been a fiancé for over a month, and only a week remained before the wedding, but the Count still had not resolved the question of the dowry for himself and had not discussed it with his wife. First, the Count wanted to allot Vera the Ryazan estate, then to sell some woodlands, then to borrow money on a promissory note. Several days before the wedding, Berg came into the Count's study early in the morning and with a pleasant smile respectfully asked his future father-in-law to tell him what Countess Vera's dowry would be. This long-anticipated question embarrassed the Count so much that he unthinkingly said the first thing that came into his head. I like that you're concerned about it. I like it. You'll be satisfied. And patting Berg on the shoulder, he got up, wishing to end the conversation. But Berg, smiling pleasantly, explained that unless he knew for certain what Vera's dowry would be and received a large part of what was allotted her in advance, he would be forced to renounce. But consider, Count, if you were to allow myself to marry now, not having definite means of supporting my wife, I would be acting basely. The conversation ended with the Count, who wished to be magnanimous and not subjected to new requests, saying that he would give him a promissory note for 80,000. Berg smiled meekly, kissed the Count on the shoulder, and said that he was very grateful, but he was quite unable to settle into the new life now without receiving 30,000 in cash. Or at least 20,000, Count, he added, and then a promissory note for only 60,000. Yes, all right, the Count said quickly. Only excuse me, my friend, I'll give you 20,000 and a promissory note for 80,000 besides. So there, kiss me. Section 12. Natasha was 16, and it was the year 1809, the same she had counted up to on her fingers with Boris 4 years ago after they had kissed. Since then, she had not seen Boris once. To Sonia and her mother, when the conversation turned to Boris, she said quite freely as a decided thing that all that had gone before was childishness, not worth talking about and long forgotten. But in the most secret depths of her soul, the question whether her engagement to Boris was a joke or an important binding promise tormented her. Since Boris left Moscow for the army in 1805, he had not seen the Rostovs. He had visited Moscow several times, had passed by not far from Otradno, but had never once been to the Rostovs. It has sometimes occurred to Natasha that he did not want to see her, and these surmises were confirmed by the sad tone in which the older people spoke of him. Nowadays, people don't remember old friends, the Countess used to say when Boris was mentioned. Anna Mikhailovna, who had visited the Rostovs less often of late, also behaved with some special dignity, and each time spoke rapturously and gratefully of her son's merits and of the brilliant career he had entered upon. When the Rostovs came to Petersburg, Boris came to visit them. He went to them not without emotion. The remembrance of Natasha was Boris's most poetic remembrance. But at the same time, he went with the firm intention of letting her and her family feel clearly that the childhood relations between himself and Natasha could not be binding either on her or on him. He had a brilliant position in society owing to his intimacy with the Countess Bezukhov, a brilliant position in society owing to the patronage of an important person whose confidence he fully enjoyed, and he had a nascent project of marrying one of the rich, eligible girls in Petersburg, which could very easily be realized. When Boris entered the Rostovs' drawing room, Natasha was in her room. Learning of his arrival, she blushed and almost ran into the drawing room, beaming with a more than affectionate smile. Boris remembered the Natasha of 4 years ago, in a short dress with dark eyes shining under her curls and a desperate, childish laugh. Therefore, When quite a different Natasha came in, he became embarrassed and his face showed a delighted surprise. Natasha was glad of that expression on his face. "Well, do you recognize your old mischievous friend?" asked the Countess. Boris kissed Natasha's hand and said he was surprised at the change in her. "How pretty you've grown." "What else?" Natasha's shining eyes replied. "And has Papa aged?" she asked. Natasha sat down and, without entering into the conversation between Boris and the Countess, silently studied her childhood wooer in the minutest detail. He felt the weight of that persistent and affectionate gaze upon him and glanced at her from time to time. Boris's uniform, spurs, tie, haircut, all this was of the most fashionable and comme il fait. Natasha noticed it at once. He sat slightly sideways on the armchair next to the Countess, soothing with his right hand the cleanest of molded gloves on the left, spoke with an especially refined pursing of the lips about the amusements of Petersburg's high society, and with mild mockery recalled the old times in Moscow acquaintances. It was not by chance, as Natasha could feel, that in naming the high aristocracy he mentioned a ball he had attended at the ambassador's, an invitation from NN and SS. Natasha sat silently for a while, gazing at him from under her brows. This gaze disturbed and embarrassed Boris more and more. He interrupted his conversation and turned to look at Natasha more frequently. The same curious, defiant, and somewhat mocking eyes were looking at him. After his first visit, Boris said to himself that he found Natasha as attractive as ever, but that he was not going to give in to that feeling, because to marry her, a girl with almost no fortune, would ruin his career, and to renew their former relations without aiming at marriage would be an ignoble thing to do. Boris decided in himself to avoid meeting Natasha, but despite that decision, came a few days later and began to visit often and spend whole days at the Rostovs. He fancied he had to have a talk with Natasha to tell her that all the old things must be forgotten, and that despite all, she could not be his wife, that he had no fortune, and that she would never be allowed to marry him. But he kept failing and felt awkward from starting this talk. He became more and more entangled every day. Natasha, in her mother's and Sonia's observation, made him right in it and did not allow him to talk about old things, giving him the understanding how beautiful the new things were. And every day he left in a fog. Boris stopped frequenting Helene, received reproachful notes from her, and even spent whole days at the Rostovs. In nightcap and bed jacket, without false curls, and with one poor little knot of hair sticking out. Her door creaked and Natasha came running in, her bare feet in slippers, also in her bed jacket, and her hair in curling papers. The Countess looked at her and frowned. She was just finishing the last prayer. "Will this couch be my grave?" Her prayerful mood was destroyed. Natasha, red, animated, seeing her mother praying, suddenly stopped running, crouched down, and involuntarily stuck out her tongue, chiding herself. Seeing that her mother went on praying, she ran on tiptoe to the bed, quickly rubbed one small foot against the other, shaking off her slippers, and jumped onto the couch, which the old Countess feared might become her grave. This couch was high, with a feather bed and 5 pillows, each smaller than the last. Natasha jumped up, sank into the feather bed, rolled over to the wall, and began fidgeting under the blanket, settling herself, bending her knees towards her chin and kicking her feet and laughing barely audibly, now covering her head, now peeking out to look at her mother. The Countess finished her prayer and went to the bed with a stern look, but seeing that Natasha had pulled the covers over her head, she smiled her kind, weak smile. "Well, well, well," said the mother. "Mama, can we talk?" "Say yes," said Natasha. "Well, so one kiss here, another, and that's it." And she embraced her mother's neck and kissed her under the chin. There was an outward crudeness in Natasha's treatment of her mother, but she was so sensitive and adroit that, no matter how she embraced her mother, she always was able to do it, so that it was neither painful, nor unpleasant, nor awkward for her. "Well, what is it tonight?" asked her mother, settling on the pillows and waiting until Natasha, having kicked her feet and turned over twice, lay next to her under the same blanket, her arms on top of it, her expression serious. These nightly visits of Natasha's, which took place after the Count's return from the club, were one of the favorite pleasures of both mother and daughter. "What is it tonight? But I've got to tell you." Natasha covered her mother's mouth with her hand. "About Boris, I know," she said seriously. "That's what I came for. Don't tell me, I know. No, tell me." She took her hand away. "Tell me, Mama. Isn't he sweet?" "Natasha, you are 16 years old. At your age, I was married. You say Borya is sweet. He is very sweet, and I love him like a son. But what do you want? What do you think?" You've turned his head completely, I can see that. Saying this, the Countess glanced at her daughter. Natasha lay looking straight ahead fixedly at one of the carved mahogany sphinxes at the corner of the bed, so that the Countess could see her daughter's face only in profile. This face struck the Countess by its especially serious and concentrated expression. Natasha listened and reflected. Well, so what? She said. You've turned his head completely, but why? What do you want from him? You know you can't marry him. Why not? Said Natasha without changing her position. Because he's young, because he's poor, because he's a relation, because you don't love him yourself. How do you know? I know. It's not nice, my dear. But if I want to, said Natasha. Stop this silly talk, said the Countess. But if I want to, Natasha, I'm serious. Natasha did not allow her to finish, pulled the Countess's big hand towards her and kissed it on the back, then on the palm, then turned it again and began to whisper in on one knuckle, then in between, then on the next knuckle, murmuring in a whisper, January, February, March, April, May. Speak, Mamma, why are you silent? Speak, she said, glancing at her mother, who was looking at her daughter with a tender gaze, and while contemplating her like that, seemed to forget everything she wanted to say. It won't do, dearest. Not everyone will understand your childhood ties, and to see him so close to you may harm you in the eyes of other young men who visit us, and above all, it torments him for nothing. He might have found a rich match for himself, and now he's going out of his mind. Out of his mind, Natasha repeated. I'll tell you about myself. I had a cousin. I know, Kirilla Matvich. But isn't he an old man? He wasn't always an old man. But I'll tell you what, Natasha, I'll have a talk with Borya. He oughtn't to come so often. Why oughtn't he if he wants to? Because I know it will end in nothing. How do you know? No, Mama, don't talk to him. Don't you dare talk with him. How stupid, Natasha said it in the tone of a person whose property is being taken away. Well, I'm not going to marry him, so let him come if it's fun for him and fun for me. Natasha looked at her mother, smiling. Not to get married, but just so, she repeated. How's that, my dear? Just so. Well, it's necessary that I not marry him, but just so. Just so, the Countess repeated, and shaking all over, she laughed, a kindly, unexpected old woman's laugh. Enough laughing! Stop it, cried Natasha. You're shaking the whole bed. You're a terrible laugher, just like me. Wait, she seized the Countess by both hands, kissed the knuckle of her little finger, June, and went on kissing July and August on the other hand. Mamma, is he very much in love? How does it look to you? Was anyone ever so in love with you? And he's very sweet, very, very sweet, only not quite to my taste. He's so narrow, like a dining room clock. You don't understand. Narrow, you know, gray, light gray. What nonsense, said the Countess. Natasha went on. You mean you don't understand? Nikolenko would understand. Bazukov, he's blue, dark blue with red, and he's rectangular. You flirt with him too, the Countess said, laughing. No, he's a Freemason, I found out. He's very nice, dark blue with red. How can I explain to you? Little Countess, the Count's voice came from outside the door. Are you asleep? Natasha jumped up barefoot and, snatching her slippers, ran to her room. She could not fall asleep for a long time. She kept thinking that no one could understand all that she understood, and all that was in her. Sonia, she thought, looking at the curled-up, sleeping little cat with her enormous braid. No, it's beyond her. She's virtuous. She fell in love with Nikolenka and doesn't want to know anything else. Even Mama doesn't understand. It's astonishing how intelligent I am, and how sweet she is, she went on, speaking of herself in a third person and imagining that is some very intelligent man saying it about her, the most intelligent and best of men. There, everything's in her. Everything, this man went on. She's extraordinarily intelligent, sweet, and then too pretty, extraordinarily pretty, nimble. She swims. She's an excellent horsewoman, and oh, the voice! One may say, an astonishing voice. She sang her favorite musical phrase from Cherubini's opera, threw herself on the bed, laughed at the joyful thought that she was about to fall asleep, called Dunyasha to put out the candle, and before Dunyasha had left the room, had already passed into a different, happier world of dreams, where everything was as light and beautiful as in reality, only still better because it was different. The next day the Countess, having asked to see Boris, had a talk with him, and from that day on he stopped visiting the Rostovs. Section 14. On December 31st, the eve of the new year, 1810, for le Réveillon, or New Year's Eve party, a ball was given by a grand dignitary of Catherine's time. The ball was to be attended by the diplomatic corps and the sovereign. Excuse me. The dignitary's well-known house on the English embankment shone with countless lights. Police stood by the brightly lit porch laid with red baize, and not merely gendarmes, but a mounted police chief and a dozen of police officers. Carriages drove by, and the new ones drove up with red-liveried footmen and footmen with feathers in their hats. Men in uniforms, stars, and sashes emerged from the carriage. Ladies in satin and ermine carefully descended the noisily flopped-down footrests and stepped hastily and soundlessly over the baize of the porch. Also, every time a new carriage drove up, a whisper ran through the crowd and hats were doffed. The sovereign? No, a minister. Prince. Ambassador. Don't you see the feathers? Came from the crowd. One person in the crowd, better dressed than the others, seemed to know everyone and called by name the most distinguished dignitaries of the time. A third of the guests had already arrived at the ball, but the Rostovs, who were to be there, were still hurriedly preparing to dress. There had been many discussions and preparations for this ball in the Rostov family, many fears that they would not receive an invitation, the dresses would not be ready, everything would not be arranged as it ought to be. The Rostovs were going to the ball together with Maria Ignatievna Poronsky, the Countess's friend and relation, a skinny and yellow lady-in-waiting of the court, who guided the provincial Rostovs through Petersburg high society. At 10 o'clock in the evening, they were to pick up the lady-in-waiting near the Tavrichky garden, yet it was 5 minutes to 10, and the young ladies were still not dressed. Natasha was going to the first grand ball of her life. She had gotten up that day at 8 o'clock in the morning and spent the whole day in feverish anxiety and activity. Since morning, all her powers had been directed towards getting all of them. Herself, Mama, and Sonia dressed in the best possible way. Sonia and the Countess put themselves entirely in her hands. The Countess was to wear a damson velvet dress, and the two girls white gauzy dresses over pink silk slips with roses at the bodice. Their hair was to be done à la grecque. All the essentials had already been done. Feet, hands, neck, ears had been washed, perfumed, and powdered with special thoroughness for the ball. They already had on their silk lace stockings and white satin booties with bows. Their hairdressing was nearly done. Sonia was finishing dressing, as was the Countess, but Natasha, who had fussed over everybody, lagged behind. She was still sitting in front of the mirror, a peignoir thrown over her thin shoulders. Sonia, already dressed, stood in the middle of the room and pressing painfully with her small finger, was pinning on a last ribbon, which squeaked as the pin went through it. Not that way, said Sonia. Sonia, said Natasha, turning her head and putting both hands to her hair, which the maid who was holding it did not have time to let go of. The bow's wrong. Come here. Sonia crouched down, and Natasha pinned the ribbon on another way. Miss, please, it's impossible this way, said the maid who was holding Natasha's hair. Oh my God, wait then. Like that, Sonia. Won't you hurry? The Countess's voice was heard. It's already 10. Right away. Are you ready, Mama? I only have to pin on my top. Don't do it without me, cried Natasha. You won't manage. But it's already 10. It had been decided to appear at the ball at 10:30, but Natasha still had to dress, and they still had to drive to Tavrichky garden. Having finished doing her hair, Natasha, in a short petticoat, her ball slippers showing from under it, and wearing her mother's bed jacket, ran up to Sonia, looked her over, and then ran to her mother. She turned her mother's head, pinned on the top, and quickly kissing her gray hair, ran again to the maids who were taking up her skirt. The only thing now was Natasha's skirt, which was too long. Two maids were taking it up, hurriedly biting off the thread. A third, holding pins in her lips and between her teeth, kept running from the Countess to Sonia. A fourth held the whole gauze dress on her high-raised arm. Mavrushka, darling, be quick. Hand me the thimble there, miss. Will you hurry up, finally, the Countess said, coming through the door. Here's your scent. Mademoiselle Poronsky must be waiting. Madame Poronsky must be waiting. It's ready, miss, said the maid, lifting the taken-up gauze dress with two fingers and shaking it and blowing at something, showing by this gesture an awareness of the airiness and purity of which she was holding. Natasha began to put the dress on. One moment, don't come in, Papa, she cried to her father, who had opened the door, still under the gauze of her skirt, which covered her whole face. Sonia slammed the door. A moment later, the Count was admitted. He was wearing a dark blue tailcoat, stockings and shoes, was perfumed and pomaded. "Papa, you look so handsome. It's lovely," said Natasha, standing in the middle of the room, spreading the folds of the gauze. "Let me, miss, let me," said the maid, getting on her knees, pulling at the dress, and moving the pins with her tongue from one side of her mouth to the other. "Say what you like," Sonia cried, with a despair in her voice, looking at Natasha's dress. "Say what you like, but it's still too long." Natasha stepped back to look at herself in the pier glass. The dress was too long. "By God, miss, it's not too long at all," said Mavrushka, who was crawling on the floor following her young lady. "Well, if it's too long, we can take it up. We can take it up in a minute," said the resolute Dunyasha, taking needle out of the fichu on her breast and setting to work again on the floor. Just then the Countess came in bashfully with quick, quiet steps, her toque and velvet dress. "Oh, my beauty," said the Count, "better than any of you." He was about to embrace her, but she retreated, blushing, so as not to have her dress rumpled. "Mamma, the toque more to one side," said Natasha. "I'll repin it." And she rushed forward, and the sewing girls, who had no time to follow her, tore off a piece of gauze. "My God, what is this? It's not my fault, I swear." "Never mind, I'll stitch it up. It won't show," said Dunyasha. "My beauty, my queen," the nanny said, coming through the door. "And Sonyushka, too, what beauties." At 10:15, they finally got in the carriage and drove off, but they had to stop at Tavrichki Garden. Madame Peronsky was ready. Despite her old age and unattractiveness, the same thing had been done to her as at the Rostovs, though not as hurriedly. It was a habitual thing for her. Her old, unattractive body had been perfumed, washed, and powdered in just the same way. She had been scrubbed behind the ears just as carefully, and just as at the Rostovs, her old maid had delightedly admired her mistress's outfit when she came out to the drawing room in a yellow dress with a monogram. Madame Peronsky praised the attire of the Rostovs. The Rostovs praised her taste and attire, and mindful of their dresses and hair, put themselves in the carriage at 11 o'clock and drove off. Better late than never. Section 15. Natasha had not one free moment since the morning of that day, and had never once had time to think about what lay ahead of her. In the damp, cold air, in the incomplete darkness of the crowded, rocking carriage, she imagined vividly for the first time what awaited her there at the ball, in the brightly lit rooms, music, flowers, dancing, the sovereign, all the brilliant youth in Petersburg. What awaited her was so beautiful that she did not even believe it could happen. So out of keeping it was with the impression of the cold, the crowdedness, the dark. So out of keeping it was with the impression of the cold, the crowdedness, the darkness of the carriage. She understood what awaited her only when, having stepped out over the red baize of the porch, she entered the front hall, took off her fur coat, and walked beside Sonia, in front of her mother, between the flowers on the lighted stairway. Only then did she remember how one had to behave at a ball, and tried to assume the majestic manner she considered necessary for a girl at a ball. But luckily for her, she felt her eyes looking everywhere at once. She saw nothing clearly. Her pulse beat 100 times a minute, and the blood began to throb in her head, in her heart. She was unable to assume that manner which would have made her ridiculous, and walked on, faint with excitement, and only trying as hard as she could to conceal it. And this was the manner that was most becoming to her. Before them, behind them, also talking quietly and also in ball gowns, other guests were entering. The mirrors on the stairway reflected ladies in white, blue, pink dresses with diamonds and pearls on their bare arms and necks. Natasha looked in the mirrors and in the reflections could not distinguish herself from the others. Everything mixed into one brilliant procession. At the entrance to the first room, the monotonous noise of voices, footsteps, greetings deafened Natasha. The light and brilliance dazzled her still more. The host and hostess, who had already been standing by the door for half an hour, sang the same words to the entering people. "Charmé de vous voir," delighted to see you, greeted the Rostovs and Madame Peronsky in the same way. The two girls in white dresses with identical roses in their dark hair curtsied identically, but the hostess involuntarily rested her gaze longer on the slender Natasha. She looked at her and smiled at her alone with a special smile, in addition to her hostess' smile. Gazing at her, the hostess may have remembered the golden, irretrievable time of her girlhood and her own first ball. The host also followed Natasha with his eyes and asked the Count which one was his daughter. "Charmant," he said, kissing the tips of his fingers. The guests stood in the ballroom, crowding by the door, waiting for the sovereign. The Countess placed herself in the first row of this crowd. Natasha heard and felt that several voices were asking about her and looking at her. She realized that she was liked by those who paid attention to her, and this observation reassured her somewhat. There are some like us, and some worse than us, she thought. Madame Peronsky named for the Countess the most important persons at the ball. That one is the Dutch ambassador, see, the grey-haired one, she said, pointing to a little old man with abundant, curly, silver-gray hair, surrounded by ladies whom he made laugh at something. And here she is, the Queen of Petersburg, Countess Bezúkhov, she said, pointing to the entering Helene. How beautiful! She yields nothing to Maria Antonovna. See how the men dangle after her, both young and old, both beautiful and brilliant. They say Prince has lost his mind over her, but these two here, they're not beautiful, are still more surrounded. She pointed to a lady who was crossing the room with a very unattractive daughter. She's a millionaire bride, said Mademoiselle Peronsky, and here come the wooers. That's Madame Bezúkhov's brother, Anatoly Korygin, she said, pointing to a handsome horse guard who walked past them, looking somewhere above the ladies from the height of his raised head. Handsome, isn't he? They say he's to marry this rich one. And your cousin Debretskoy is also dangling after her very much. Millions, they say. Why, but that's the French ambassador himself, she replied to the Countess's question about who Caulaincourt was. Look at him. Like some sort of Tsar, but all the same the French are nice, very nice. There's nothing nicer for society. Ah, here she is. No, she's the best. Our Maria Antonovna. And so simply dressed. Lovely. And that fat one in the spectacles is the universal Freemason, said Madame Peronsky, pointing to Bezúkhov. Set him next to his wife, a real tomfool. Pierre walked along, rolling his fat body, parting the crowd, nodding to right and left as casually and good-naturedly as if he were walking through a marketplace crowd. He moved through the crowd, evidently searching for someone. Natasha looked joyfully at the familiar face of Pierre, that tomfool, as Madame Peronsky called him, and knew that Pierre was looking for them in the crowd, and for her in particular. Pierre had promised to be at the ball and to introduce partners to her. But before he reached them, Bezúkhov stopped beside a very handsome, dark-haired man of medium height, in a white uniform, who was standing by a window, talking to a tall man with stars and a sash. Natasha immediately recognized the young man of medium height in the white uniform. It was Volkonsky, who seemed to her to have grown younger, more cheerful, and better-looking. Here's another acquaintance. Volkonsky, see, Mama? Said Natasha, pointing to Prince Andrei. Remember, he spent the night with us at Otradno. Ah, you know him, said Madame Peronsky. I can't bear him. Il fait à présent les plus et les boutons. He runs the whole show now. And such boundless pride takes after his papa. Got in with Speransky, drafting some sort of project. Look at how he treats the ladies. She's talking to him and he turns away, she said, pointing to him. I'd give it to him if he behaved with me the way he does with these ladies. And that is all for today. I kind of want to keep going because that seemed to move quite quickly, and the ball just sounds so exciting. But I'm going to save it for tomorrow. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, we'll pick up in the ball. And suddenly the crowd stirs and begins to talk. So, yeah, I think, yeah, we'll leave the ball for tomorrow. It's not fair, I know, but it's all right. It will be all right. Maybe we'll do a little extra tomorrow and on Thursday to get us through the end of part 3, but I'll take a look at that. So, what sounds familiar? There's a comment about sounds familiar. I'm guessing the tardiness in getting ready, because I can totally relate to that. I'm sure my family members would not dare call me out like that on a live broadcast for the whole entire world to see. But then again, maybe they would. But yes, the ball sounds exciting. Can't wait to read more. Thank you guys for stopping by. And I will see you tomorrow. Check out, like I said, the descriptions, as I'm adding a few more links day by day. And again, I hope you guys have a great day. And stay safe and stay loving out there, peeps.